building in the whole world, not just in Egypt. It's built over almost 200 acres of land, over 2,000 years of time. The pharaohs of Egypt came here one after another to build us great constructions there, ending up by the first pylon built by King Nekhta-Nebo. So, when you come to visit Egypt and when you enter Luxor Temple and Karnak temples, you're going to compare between all the monuments of the world and the monuments especially here in Luxor, because it's a very specific city, it's a very nice city to be visited. Karnak Temple is considered the biggest and greatest historical record in the world. For its buildings, which were constructed in 2,000 years, over 60 acres of land, comprises written records of the history of Egypt and its civilization. The sacred land of Karnak included the big temple of god Amun-Ra, in addition to other temples dedicated to different gods, like God Khonsu Temple and Goddess Ibit Temple in the south, and God Betah Temple in the north, and the destroyed temple of God Aton in the east. All these temples and chapels were surrounded by a great mud brick wall that reached 12 meters in thickness and 550 meters tall, and 480 meters wide and 20 meters high. The wall has 8 entrances, 2 in the north joining Amun-Ra Temple with Monto Temple, and it's barren from reliefs, 2 entrances in the south leading to Goddess Mut and God Khonsu, and the gate of Ptolemy III that lead to Luxor Temple. There are 2 entrances in the east and 3 in the west, the middle of which is where the first pylon is situated, and it's the main entrance of Karnak. The wall was built by King Nekhta-Nebo from the 30th dynasty, which is the last ruling family in the pharaonic history. Barget thinks that the mud brick wall is not horizontal, but bent in a wavy shape for 2 reasons. The first one is that this geometrical method prevents its destruction. The second reason is religious. The wavy wall resembles the eternal water which surrounds the sacred hill which rose out of the eternal ocean called Nun. So the constructions within it represent the sacred hill itself, and thus they are sacred. Karnak Temple starts with a port, built specially for god Amon, the sun god. He used it annually in the Opet festival, when he left his temple in Karnak to visit Luxor Temple, where his wife Mut stays. His sacred bark was placed on a sailing boat called User Hat. It was made of cedar wood and coated with gold. The port is a large high dock with steps, connected to the Nile through a channel derived from the Nile. It was used at least until the 26th dynasty, for the level of the Nile during inundation was recorded between the 22nd and the 26th dynasties. In the middle of the port was a square base for the rest of the sacred bark. The pier is high and descends gradually until it reaches the road that leads to the first pylon, which is flanked on both sides with rams. 2 sandstone obelisks adorn the northeast and southeast corners of the port, ahead of the avenue of rams. One of them still stands, while only the base of the other exists. They belong to King Seti II. avenue of rams is a way between two rows of statues. Each is composed of a ram head and a lion's body. The way is 52 meters tall and 13.1 meters wide and stops 20 meters away from the first pylon. This avenue reached the second pylon of Ramesses II, as the rest of it exists behind the first pylon, which was added by King Nectanebo 11 dynasties later. The avenue was called in ancient Egyptian language Ta Mit Rehnet, which means the Avenue of Rams. The ram, which is a form of god Amun-Ra, protects the temple and its entrances. Each ram head rests on a royal figure to signify the protection of the god to the king. The name of King Ramesses II was relieved on the rams. Then, in the 21st dynasty, King Ba'ankhi recorded his name on some of them. The first pylon of Karnak is 113 meters tall and 40 meters high. Its thickness is 15 meters. Its builder is King Nectanebo from the 30th dynasty, and it was never finished. The act that made it the most important one, as it showed how exactly these great walls were built by mud brick scaffoldings, leaving no place for the ridiculous assumptions of aliens' hands. The court behind the pylon belongs to the 22nd dynasty. It's 80 meters tall and 100 meters wide. It's flanked on each side by one row of papyrus giant columns with open capitals, built by King Shishong I. It had different names, like Weba, which means the front court, and Weskhet Khefet Her, meaning the front hall, and Weskhet Hebit, or the celebration hall. On the left side of the court are the three chapels of King Seti II, dedicated to the Triad of Thebes. It's a small sandstone building with a middle chamber for the rest of the bark of Amun-Ra. The left one was for his wife goddess Mut, and the right one for his son Khonsu. Seti II called his chapels the Great Temple for millions of years. Built in front of the temple Ibet Sut or Karnak. This means that, during his time, the last pylon in the temple was the one behind it, which was built by King Horemheb at first and completed by King Ramesses I. In the middle of the court is the Harka column, which is the only one left from 10 equally giant beautiful columns, composing a colonnade or a hall of columns. This Ethiopian king constructed it in the 7th century BC, but it was totally destroyed. The Egyptian Organization of Antiquities rebuilt this column in 1928 and 1929 and found the names of Pesmatik II of the 26th dynasty and Ptolemy IV Philometor. At the end of the restoration, Geoffrey, the French architect, stood on top of the 21 meters tall column and said, 100 persons can sit and have lunch on top of it. Then everyone clapped their hands. The first open court in Karnak Temple reaches 4,180 square meters. It's enough to contain the Cathedral of St. Paul of London, with an extra space of 929 square meters. Ages and builders succeeded one another in this court in a complicated way, for the monuments in it belong to several dynasties, starting from the 18th until the 30th dynasty. In addition addition to the Avenue of Rams, Ramesses II had two statues of himself standing at the eastern end of the court. One has only the legs remaining from it, and the other still stands in glory. It represents him wearing the double crown and dressed elegantly, with a smart kilt and a nice belt with a dagger handle appearing from it. A small statuette of his wife Queen Nefertari stands above his feet. The statue was usurped by King Pi-Nejem, who carved his name on it. Beside the statue is a stele of King Bismatik II, who granted himself the honor of constructing a shed that leads to the second pylon, when it was originally constructed by King Taharqa of the 25th dynasty. The second pylon is destroyed to a great deal. Its length is 98 meters, with a height of 29.5 meters and thickness of 14 meters. The names of several kings were found by the entrance, like King Ramesses II and his father Seti I and his grandfather Ramesses I and his successor King Ramesses III. The Greek kings Ptolemy VI and VII opened an entrance there. The pylon itself was constructed by King Horemheb and Seti I. It's quite rare to find such a collection of pharaohs who belong to many ages in one court, for here in Karnak there are about 12 centuries reflected in all these monuments, which told their stories and elaborated a great part of the history of Egypt. The temple of King Ramesses III was constructed in Karnak Temple, in front of the final gate of the temple at its time. It proves that Ramesses III considered the temple was finished by the building of Ramesses I pylon and Ramesses II Avenue of Rams leading to the port of the Nile. He didn't know that his small temple was meant to be included within many constructions added later in the 10 dynasties which followed, ending by the Greek invasion. Preceding the temple are two statues of sandstone representing the king wearing the double crown of Egypt above the nemes, or the traditional hair cover. Once upon a time they were colored, just like the temple behind them. Ramesses III is represented on the walls of the pylons, grabbing the hair of his enemies, who belong to 3 captured cities, and presents them to god Amon. In the open court, 8 statues are carved with their pillars on each side of the court. The king is represented in his Osiris shape. The walls on the back side of the pylon have King Ramesses III receiving the Jubilee symbol from Amon, who promised him a long time of ruling. On the other walls he proceeds the procession of the bark of Amon-Min. An ascending aisle leads to a vestibule, which lies ahead of the colonnade with 8 papyrus columns. This hall was once inlaid with bronze or gold. Through the hall we reach the most important part of the temple, which is the sanctuary. Here there are 3 chapels for the triad gods of Thebes: Amon in the middle, Khonsu on the right, and Mut on the left. They are decorated with scenes of the king performing religious rituals on the sacred barks that used to be placed within the sanctuaries on altars. It's one small temple within the precinct of Karnak, but it includes all the factors that are to be found in any ancient Egyptian temple of the New Kingdom, and forms with the rest of the constructions of Karnak Temple the splendid eternal constructions of the mighty Egyptians. Beyond the 3rd pylon of Karnak is a rectangular hall ahead of the 4th pylon, which was constructed by King Thutmose I. He had also erected two obelisks, one of which still stands till today. It's 21.3 meters high and weighs 143 tons. 3 rows of texts are inscribed on 3 of its 4 sides. The middle one belongs to the king, and the other 2 were added by King Ramses IV 347 years later. The pylon is ruined, and the hypostyle hall that followed was evacuated from its wooden columns by Queen Hatshepsut, who erected her famous double obelisks in it after removing the ceiling. One of them was broken and the other still stands. It's 29.5 meters high and cut out of red granite. It weighs 323 tons and is placed over a base which side reaches 2.65 meters high. Over it is a text, inscribed by the Queen, telling the time it took her to cut them out of the quarries of granite in Aswan, and the reason they were erected for. Today, her obelisk is a landmark of the whole area of constructions in Karnak Temple. After the ruins of the 5th and 6th pylons, we reach the 2 small annual halls of Thutmose III, characterized by the 2 granite pillars adorned with the reliefs of the papyrus and lotus flowers, symbols of the north and south of Egypt. There are also 2 statues for Amun and Amunet, cut out by King Tutankhamun of sandstone, and that's why they have his features. The sanctuary of Karnak lies on the axis of the temple. There were at least 4 of them, built consequently by different kings after each of them had removed the one built before his time. The existing one is the last one built by King Philip Ardeos in 305 BC. The inner and outer reliefs of the sanctuary describe the religious ceremonies of god Amun, celebrated here in his home that's known today as Karnak.
رمضان في مصر حاجة تانية والسر في التفاصيل. رمضان في مصر غير الدنيا، طعمه بطعم النيل. رمضان في مصر